The cruelest traps are the ones people walk into smiling. The gold letters on the invitation caught the morning sunlight as Claire Whitmore held the card above her kitchen counter. Across the top, beneath the logo of Whitmore Technologies, was a single line. "We would be honored by your presence at our 15th anniversary gala." Claire stared at the words for a moment. Then her eyes moved to the handwritten note beneath them. "Hope you can make it. It would mean a lot, Ethan." A soft laugh escaped her lips. Not because the note was kind, because it was predictable. The coffee machine hummed in the background. Outside the apartment window, a delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. Claire set the invitation beside a neat stack of unopened mail and reached for a dark blue folder resting on the counter. The edges were worn from months of handling. A yellow sticky note was attached to the front. She glanced at the date written across the top page. 6 months earlier. Her fingers rested on it for only a second before she closed the folder and slid it back into a drawer. The invitation remained on the counter. Bright, elegant, harmless looking, exactly the way Ethan liked his traps. Across town, giant banners bearing Ethan Whitmore's face hung outside a downtown hotel. Employees moved through the ballroom carrying floral arrangements and polished glass centerpieces. Technicians tested spotlights above the stage. The company's anniversary gala was already being described as one of the biggest corporate events of the year. Ethan stood near the stage reviewing notes while photographers adjusted their cameras. He smiled for every picture. Confident, relaxed, untouchable. At least that was the image. Back in her apartment, Claire opened her laptop. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Rows of dates, numbers, notes, names. She clicked through several files before stopping at an email thread. Her expression never changed. No anger, no satisfaction, just focus. After a few seconds, she closed the computer and checked the time. The gala was still 3 days away. Plenty of time. Her phone vibrated softly against the countertop. A message appeared. "Everything remains on schedule." Claire read it once, then locked the screen. No reply. No celebration. She simply picked up her coffee mug and walked toward the living room. The invitation remained where she had left it, waiting. 3 nights later, black cars lined the entrance of the hotel as guests stepped onto the red carpet beneath crystal lights. Camera flashes reflected off polished marble floors. Laughter drifted through the lobby. Claire arrived alone. Her black evening dress was elegant without demanding attention. She handed her invitation to the hostess and stepped inside. Several conversations slowed when people recognized her. A few smiles appeared. Others exchanged curious glances. Some remembered who she was. Most remembered who she used to be. At the far end of the ballroom, Ethan spotted her. The corner of his mouth lifted. Exactly as expected. Claire met his gaze from across the room. Calm, steady. Neither looked away. Ethan believed she had walked into his game. Claire knew she had walked into hers. As servers moved between tables carrying silver trays of champagne, she quietly placed her phone face down beside her seat. The screen lit for half a second before fading black again. A single message had arrived. "Ready when you are." Claire folded her hands in her lap and looked toward the stage where Ethan was greeting guests beneath the bright lights. Around her, the ballroom sparkled with success. Applause echoed against the high ceilings. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. No one in the room noticed the tiny smile that appeared on Claire's face before disappearing again. The night was beginning exactly the way she hoped it would. The most dangerous advantage is not money. It is information. Claire sat at her table near the center of the ballroom while a string quartet played softly beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Around her, executives exchanged business cards, investors discussed market forecasts, and servers moved between tables carrying trays of sparkling water and champagne. Everything looked polished. Everything looked successful. Across the room, Ethan moved from group to group with practiced confidence. Every handshake seemed to last a little longer than necessary. Every smile appeared carefully measured. Several guests laughed at something he said, and Ethan rewarded them with another story. Claire watched for only a moment before turning her attention elsewhere. She had spent years watching Ethan perform. There was nothing new left to learn. A waiter placed a glass of water beside her. She thanked him and glanced toward the ballroom entrance. A gray-haired man wearing thin-framed glasses had just stepped inside. No one rushed to greet him. No cameras followed him. He simply checked his phone and disappeared into the crowd. Claire noticed him for less than 2 seconds before looking away. 20 feet from the ballroom, behind a set of closed conference room doors, another gathering was taking place. 3 people sat around a long table covered with documents and laptops. One screen displayed financial records. Another displayed transaction dates. A third displayed a growing list of internal communications. A woman wearing a navy blazer highlighted a line of text and slid a document toward her colleague. The room remained quiet except for the sound of keyboards and turning pages. Back inside the gala, no one knew the meeting was happening. That was exactly the point. Claire lifted her water glass and listened as a nearby guest praised Ethan's leadership. The woman spoke about his vision, his ambition, his remarkable rise after the divorce. Claire's expression remained unchanged. On the surface, the story sounded impressive. But stories often depended on which pages people skipped. 6 months earlier, Claire had sat alone in a downtown office building on the 23rd floor. Rain had streaked across the windows while she reviewed boxes of archived company records. A legal pad rested beside her. Names, dates, signatures. She had written each one by hand. Not because she needed to, because she wanted to remember every piece, every detail, every inconsistency. At midnight, when the building had nearly emptied, she had closed the final box and drawn a single line beneath her notes. Then she had quietly scheduled another meeting, and another after that. No speeches, no threats, just patience. The memory faded as applause suddenly erupted across the ballroom. Ethan had stepped onto a small platform near the center of the room to welcome several major investors. Camera flashes illuminated his face. He looked completely comfortable under the attention. Claire glanced down at her phone. The screen remained dark. She slid it slightly closer to her plate. Across the ballroom, Ethan continued speaking. Guests nodded along. The evening was unfolding exactly according to his plan. Or at least that was what he believed. Near the back of the room, the gray-haired man checked his watch. In the conference room upstairs, another document received a digital timestamp. A file was uploaded. A notification was sent. Claire rested her hands calmly in her lap. The orchestra continued playing. Glasses clinked softly. Laughter drifted through the room. To everyone around her, she looked like a woman attending her former husband's celebration. No one could see the invisible machinery already moving beneath the surface. And no one noticed the faint reflection from her phone screen as a new message silently appeared. Review complete. Claire lowered her eyes to the glowing screen for only a second before locking the phone again. Review complete. 2 words. Nothing more. Yet the message carried the weight of 6 months. Around her, the ballroom remained bright and effortless. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the linen-covered tables. A jazz trio had replaced the string quartet, and the soft rhythm blended with hundreds of conversations floating through the room. No one noticed the message. No one noticed Claire slide the phone beside her folded napkin. To everyone else, she looked perfectly ordinary. A former spouse attending a company celebration. A woman sitting quietly while her successful ex-husband enjoyed the spotlight. Ethan certainly believed that story. He stood near the stage laughing with a group of board members. One hand rested comfortably in his pocket while the other held a glass of sparkling water. Every few minutes he glanced across the room toward Claire. Not enough to appear obvious. Just enough to reassure himself she was still there. Still watching. Still occupying the role he had assigned to her. Claire looked away before his eyes found hers. A waiter passed carrying silver trays filled with miniature desserts. She selected one and thanked him. Nearby, 2 executives discussed stock projections for the next quarter. One mentioned an upcoming acquisition. The other predicted another year of record growth. Claire listened without appearing to listen. Certain names surfaced in the conversation. Names she recognized from spreadsheets, contracts, and archived emails. Names she had written down months earlier on yellow legal pads beneath the glow of a desk lamp. Across the ballroom, a side door opened. A man in a dark suit entered carrying a slim black briefcase. He exchanged a few words with hotel staff before disappearing down a hallway leading toward the conference rooms. Most guests never looked up. Claire did. Her gaze lingered for half a heartbeat before returning to her plate. Then she checked the time. 8:23. Exactly on schedule. Ethan suddenly stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The room gradually quieted. Chairs shifted. Conversations faded. Guests turned their attention forward. Ethan smiled as applause filled the ballroom. He thanked employees, thanked investors, thanked supporters who had believed in the company from the beginning. The speech sounded polished, familiar, rehearsed. Claire watched him through the glow of stage lights. The audience saw confidence. She saw patterns. The slight pause before certain statistics. The exaggerated emphasis on specific achievements. The careful omission of certain years. She had once helped write many of those presentations. She knew where every polished sentence had been placed. Ethan continued speaking while images flashed across giant screens behind him. Company milestones, product launches, magazine covers, awards, smiling photographs, success compressed into a highlight reel. Applause erupted several times throughout the presentation. Each round seemed to energize him further. Then Claire noticed something else. Near the rear of the ballroom sat a man she had never met. Silver hair, dark suit, no entourage, no introduction. Unlike most guests, he was not watching the stage. He was watching the room. His eyes moved from the board members to the investors, then briefly toward Claire. Their gazes met for less than a second. The stranger offered the faintest nod before returning his attention elsewhere. Claire did not react, but she remembered the face. On stage, Ethan lifted his glass for a celebratory toast. The crowd followed. Hundreds of glasses rose beneath the chandeliers. Claire lifted hers as well. Crystal touched crystal. Smiles spread across the room. Cameras flashed. The perfect picture. Yet beneath the applause, beneath the music, beneath the carefully crafted image of success, invisible wheels continued turning. Upstairs, documents were being reviewed. Digital signatures were being recorded. Timelines were being verified. And while Ethan stood beneath the spotlight believing the evening belonged to him, Claire quietly set her glass back on the table and watched the second hand move across her watch. The night was progressing exactly where she needed it to go. The applause gradually faded as guests returned to their conversations, but Claire remained still for another moment, her fingers resting lightly against the stem of her glass. The giant screens behind the stage continued displaying photographs from the company's history. Smiling executives, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, award banquets, carefully selected memories. From a distance, it looked like the story of a flawless rise. Claire knew better than most how much editing it had taken to create that version of the past. A server stopped beside her table and refilled her water. She thanked him with a small nod before checking the time again. 8:37. Across the ballroom, Ethan had become surrounded by investors and senior managers eager to congratulate him. The circle around him seemed to grow larger every minute. Confidence radiated from him. He stood taller than everyone nearby, laughing easily as he accepted praise. Claire watched him for only a second before her attention shifted toward the ballroom entrance. Two women wearing business attire had quietly arrived. Neither approached the stage. Neither joined the celebration. Instead, they walked toward a side corridor near the conference rooms. One carried a tablet. The other carried a slim leather portfolio. Their badges were turned inward, hidden from casual view. Most guests never noticed them. Claire did. Then she looked away. The movement was so small that no one around her seemed to register it. Months earlier, she had sat in a different room under very different lighting. No chandeliers, no music, just fluorescent lights humming above a long oak table. Legal documents had been spread across the surface in neat stacks. A man with silver reading glasses had pushed a folder toward her. Claire remembered the sound the folder made as it slid across the polished wood. She remembered the weight of the pages inside. Most of all, she remembered what she did next. She did not argue. She did not make accusations. She simply opened another notebook and began writing dates. One after another, meeting after meeting, record after record, piece after piece. Like assembling a puzzle no one else realized existed. The memory dissolved as laughter erupted from a nearby table. Claire looked up. One of Ethan's board members was recounting a story from the company's early years. The group laughed again. Ethan smiled and raised his glass. For a moment he looked directly toward Claire. His expression carried something almost triumphant, as if her presence validated his success, as if tonight had become proof that he had won. Claire held his gaze for a second before calmly returning her attention to the ballroom. Nothing in her face changed. No irritation, no challenge, just patience. Her phone vibrated once beneath the table. This time she did not reach for it immediately. The vibration stopped. Several seconds passed. Then she picked it up and unlocked the screen. A new message waited. Timeline verified. Claire read the words once. Then she deleted the notification and locked the screen. Nearby, a photographer moved through the crowd taking pictures. Flash after flash illuminated smiling faces. Future headlines. Future social media posts. Future marketing campaigns. Yet somewhere above the ballroom, behind closed doors and secured networks, entirely different records were being created. Documents were being compared. Signatures were being matched. Financial timelines were being aligned with transaction logs. No dramatic confrontation. No raised voices. Just facts finding their places. At the far end of the room, the silver-haired stranger she had noticed earlier remained seated alone. While others focused on the stage, he seemed interested in people. His attention drifted from executives to investors, from board members to legal advisors. Then his eyes briefly found Claire again. This time his expression revealed the faintest hint of curiosity, as though he had started noticing details others missed. Claire lowered her phone beside her plate and folded her hands together. The jazz music continued. The chandeliers glowed overhead. Ethan remained at the center of attention. Everything looked exactly as he wanted. Everything looked exactly as Claire expected. And as the second hand moved steadily across her watch, another invisible piece of the board quietly slid into position. The difference between confidence and certainty is that certainty never needs an audience. Claire sat quietly while the ballroom continued celebrating around her. The energy in the room had shifted after Ethan's presentation. Investors seemed more relaxed. Executives moved confidently between tables. Conversations had become louder, glasses emptier, smiles broader. Success had a way of making people lower their guard. Claire noticed it every time she attended events like this. People stopped paying attention when they believed they were winning. Across the room, Ethan had become the center of another circle of admirers. Stories flowed easily from him. Future expansion plans, new partnerships, ambitious forecasts. Every sentence sounded polished enough for a business magazine cover. Several guests leaned closer as he spoke. Others nodded before he even finished his thoughts. Claire glanced at her watch. 8:49. Then she looked toward the rear corner of the ballroom where the silver-haired stranger remained seated. Unlike everyone else, he was not trying to be seen. No introductions. No speeches. No attempts to join the spotlight. A server approached him with a drink menu. The man smiled politely and ordered coffee instead. That detail caught Claire's attention. Most people came to galas for appearances. Coffee suggested he was there for observation. A few moments later, a member of the hotel's executive staff approached his table. Their conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet when the staff member left, his posture had noticeably changed. More respectful. More careful. Claire filed the observation away without reacting. Nearby, a photographer asked several guests to gather for pictures. Flashbulbs illuminated the room again. The silver-haired man declined when invited. He remained seated, stirring his coffee while studying the ballroom with quiet interest. His gaze drifted across the crowd before stopping briefly on Claire. This time he offered a small smile. Not familiarity, recognition, as though he had reached a conclusion about something. Claire returned a polite nod before looking away. On the surface, it seemed insignificant. Yet she noticed that two executives who had ignored him earlier suddenly approached his table moments later. Their expressions were entirely different now. More cautious, more attentive. The stranger listened while they spoke, occasionally nodding. He never appeared eager to impress anyone. The confidence felt effortless. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally noticed the interaction. Claire saw the shift immediately. His eyes lingered on the group. Curiosity replaced certainty for a fraction of a second. Then he excused himself from his conversation and began moving through the crowd. Guests parted naturally as he approached the corner table. By the time Ethan arrived, both executives were standing. Handshakes were exchanged. Smiles appeared. From a distance, the interaction looked cordial, professional. Yet Ethan's body language revealed something else. He was trying to identify the stranger, trying to determine his value, trying to understand why people suddenly seemed interested in a man no one had mentioned all evening. Claire lowered her eyes toward her phone. The screen remained dark. No new messages. No alerts. Upstairs, the work continued without her involvement. That had always been part of the plan. The strongest systems required no supervision once they were set in motion. She picked up her glass and took a small sip of water. When she looked up again, Ethan was still speaking with the silver-haired man. The conversation remained brief. Then the stranger stood. For the first time all evening, guests nearby appeared to recognize him. Expressions changed. Whispers moved from table to table. Phones discreetly appeared beneath tablecloths as names were searched. Claire watched none of it directly. Instead, she watched Ethan. The confidence remained on his face, but something else had appeared beneath it. Interest. It was Claire. Some victories announce themselves with applause. Others arrive as a single message on a dark screen. Claire remained seated while conversations swirled around her. The revelation of Alexander Reed's presence had quietly altered the atmosphere of the ballroom. People who had ignored him an hour earlier now seemed eager to be noticed by him. Executives adjusted their schedules. Investors found reasons to pass near his table. Even the photographers appeared more interested in capturing his image than Ethan's. Yet Alexander seemed almost untouched by the attention. He spent most of his time listening, watching, measuring. Claire noticed that more than anything else, powerful people usually enjoyed being heard. Alexander appeared far more interested in what others revealed when they believed they were impressing him. Across the room, Ethan had fully shifted his focus. Every few minutes he found another opportunity to engage with Alexander. Another conversation, another introduction, another carefully timed appearance. The strategy was obvious. Ethan wanted the billionaire's attention. He wanted validation, investment, influence, perhaps all three. Claire glanced at her watch. 8:58. The second hand continued its steady movement. She had been tracking time all evening, not because she was nervous, but because timing mattered. Certain documents had to be reviewed in sequence. Certain approvals had to arrive in order. A chain only worked when every link connected. Her phone vibrated softly beneath the table. This time she picked it up immediately. One message waited on the screen. Confirmed. Claire read the word once. No emoji. No explanation. No follow-up. Just confirmation. She exhaled slowly and locked the screen. Then she placed the phone beside her water glass exactly where it had been before. Nothing about her posture changed. Nothing about her expression shifted. Yet something inside the room had become different. The countdown was no longer theoretical. It had begun. Near the ballroom entrance, two men in dark suits exited a private elevator and disappeared down a side hallway. A few moments later, one of the women Claire had noticed earlier crossed the lobby carrying her tablet. She never entered the ballroom. She simply continued toward a secured conference area before vanishing from sight. The movements looked ordinary, routine, invisible. That was why they worked. Claire remembered a winter morning nearly 5 months earlier. Snow had collected along the edge of the sidewalk outside a law office downtown. She had arrived carrying 3 cardboard storage boxes filled with records. The receptionist had offered assistance, but Claire carried them herself. 1 box at a time, up the elevator, across the hallway, into a conference room. Hours later, when she finally emerged, the boxes were empty and the legal team had begun building a timeline that stretched across an entire wall. Transaction dates, meeting notes, internal approvals, contract amendments. The story had already existed. Someone simply needed to arrange the pieces in the correct order. Back in the ballroom, Ethan stepped onto the stage again. This time there was no formal presentation, just confidence. The microphone caught his voice as he thanked guests for attending and hinted at major announcements planned for the company's future. The audience responded warmly. Several people applauded before he even finished speaking. Ethan smiled and accepted the attention easily. Claire watched him through the glow of the stage lights. The irony almost made her smile. He believed the evening was reaching its peak. In reality, it was approaching its turning point. Near the rear of the room, Alexander Reed sat quietly with a cup of coffee. While everyone else focused on Ethan's words, Alexander's attention drifted elsewhere. His eyes settled briefly on Claire, then on the phone resting beside her hand. Then on the watch she checked one final time. 8:59. 1 minute later, her screen illuminated again. Claire looked down. 2 words appeared across the display. Ready now. For the first time all evening, she allowed herself the smallest smile before the screen went dark. At exactly 9 o'clock, nothing dramatic happened. No alarms sounded. No one rushed into the ballroom. The music continued. Glasses clinked softly. Guests smiled and carried on with their conversations. That was what made the moment so dangerous. Most turning points arrived quietly. Claire sat motionless as the glow from her phone faded. Ready now. 2 simple words. Across the room, Ethan remained on stage, completely unaware that the evening had already shifted beneath his feet. He stood comfortably beneath the lights, speaking about growth, innovation, and the future. The audience listened attentively. Investors nodded. Executives applauded at all the expected moments. Everything appeared perfect. Claire folded her hands together and watched. She had spent months preparing for this exact hour. Not this speech, not this ballroom, this moment, the point where confidence would begin doing the work for her. Ethan stepped away from the microphone and accepted another round of applause. Several board members joined him on stage. A photographer moved closer to capture the celebration. Cameras flashed repeatedly. Bright white light reflected across the crystal chandeliers overhead. Then Ethan smiled and raised his glass. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "represents everything we have built." More applause followed. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. Built. That word again. Ethan had always loved ownership. He spoke about success as if he had created it entirely alone. He never noticed how much information he revealed when he was trying to impress people. Alexander Reed certainly noticed. From his table near the rear of the ballroom, the billionaire remained silent. His coffee cup sat untouched beside him. While most guests focused on Ethan's performance, Alexander seemed more interested in Ethan's choices. Which stories he selected, which details he emphasized, which numbers he proudly repeated. On stage, Ethan continued. Revenue growth percentages, expansion milestones, strategic partnerships, timelines, dates. Certain guests appeared impressed. Claire noticed something else. Every time Ethan proudly highlighted a specific achievement, several people near the back of the room quietly checked their phones. The reactions were subtle. A glance downward, a furrowed brow. A screen quickly locked again. Easy to miss, impossible to ignore once seen. Ethan never saw any of it. His attention remained fixed on the audience in front of him. The room laughed when he told a story about overcoming challenges after the divorce. A few guests glanced toward Claire. Ethan noticed and smiled. The pause was deliberate, calculated. He wanted the comparison. He wanted the contrast between his success and her silence. Claire simply reached for her glass of water. No reaction, no expression, just calm. The photographer captured another image. Ethan at center stage. Claire seated quietly in the audience. From the outside, it looked exactly like the story Ethan wanted people to believe. Then another phone vibrated somewhere in the ballroom. Then another, and another. Small interruptions, barely noticeable at first. A board member glanced at a notification and quickly hid his screen. An investor reread an email twice before looking toward the stage again. Near the entrance, one executive quietly stepped outside to answer a call. Ethan continued speaking, unaware, confident, proud. The very traits that had always made him successful were now becoming liabilities. Because every number he repeated matched documents that were already moving through review channels. Every timeline he celebrated aligned with records that had been verified hours earlier. Every boast strengthened a story he no longer controlled. Claire watched the room instead of the stage. She saw questions beginning to form. She saw certainty fading from a few faces. She saw the first cracks appear in the image Ethan had spent years constructing. Most importantly, she saw Alexander Reed lean back in his chair and slowly smile. Not because he was surprised, because he finally understood why Claire had spent the entire evening watching the clock. The room did not collapse all at once. It unraveled one thread at a time. Ethan continued speaking beneath the stage lights, but the rhythm of the evening had changed. It began with small distractions. A board member checked his phone and did not look back up immediately. An investor who had been smiling moments earlier now stared at a screen with narrowed eyes. Another guest quietly excused herself from her table and stepped into the hallway. Individually, the moments meant nothing. Together, they created a pattern. Claire saw it forming long before anyone else. She remained seated, her hands resting calmly beside her water glass. The ballroom still glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Music still drifted through the speakers. Yet beneath the polished surface, the atmosphere was tightening. Near the front of the room, one of the company's senior directors received a phone call. He glanced at the display and immediately stood. His chair scraped softly against the floor. Several nearby guests turned toward him as he walked briskly toward the exit. Ethan noticed the movement but continued speaking. He had spent years learning how to command a room. Ignoring distractions had become second nature. Unfortunately for him, tonight the distractions were not going away. A moment later, another executive checked a notification. Then another. Several screens illuminated across the ballroom almost simultaneously. Tiny rectangles of white light appearing and disappearing among the tables. Claire did not need to read any of them. She already knew what they contained. Upstairs, reviews had become findings. Findings had become reports. Reports had become official communications. The process no longer belonged to her. It belonged to facts. Ethan smiled and continued outlining future expansion plans. Behind him, giant screens displayed projections and corporate milestones. The images looked impressive, ambitious, stable. Then a board member approached the edge of the stage. He waited politely for a pause in the presentation. Ethan glanced toward him, expecting a routine question. Instead, the man leaned closer and quietly said something in his ear. The smile on Ethan's face remained, but it arrived a fraction of a second late when he turned back toward the audience. Claire noticed. So did Alexander Reed. The billionaire sat perfectly still with his coffee cup resting near one hand. His attention never left the stage. Across the ballroom, conversations began growing softer. Curious glances passed between guests. Phones continued lighting up. Several investors were now reading lengthy messages instead of watching the presentation. One of them stood and walked directly toward the exit. Then another followed. Ethan attempted to recover momentum. He laughed, made a joke, encouraged applause. The audience responded politely, yet the energy was different now. Forced, uneven. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared around the edges of the room. Near the ballroom entrance, two legal representatives entered carrying slim portfolios. They were not dramatic. They were not confrontational. They simply moved with purpose. Their arrival alone was enough to shift several expressions. One board member lowered his head and rubbed his forehead. Another reread a message for the third time. Ethan's voice continued through the speakers. Strong, confident. Yet Claire noticed he had begun checking the audience more often. His eyes searched faces between sentences, looking for reassurance, looking for control, looking for something that was already slipping away. Then a notification appeared on the large confidence monitor positioned near the stage. Ethan glanced toward it automatically. His expression froze for the briefest moment. Not fear, recognition, the kind that arrives when separate pieces suddenly connect. Across the ballroom, several phones buzzed again at nearly the same time. The findings were now official. Reviews had become investigations. Questions had become records. Records had become consequences. Claire lowered her eyes and watched a small reflection dance across the surface of her water glass. She had not spoken a single word all evening. She did not need to. Ethan had spent the last 30 minutes proudly repeating the very timelines, transactions, and achievements that now sat documented inside the reports moving through the company. He had not been defending himself. He had been confirming the story for them. The loudest sound in the ballroom was silence. Ethan stood beneath the stage lights, but the confidence that had carried him through the evening was gone. Not completely. Not yet. Fragments of it remained in his posture, in the smile he kept trying to maintain, in the steady tone he forced into his voice. But the room no longer belonged to him. Conversations had stopped. Guests were no longer watching the presentation screens. They were watching one another, watching their phones, watching the board members gathered near the front of the stage. The celebration had transformed into something else entirely. Claire remained seated for a few moments longer. The same chair, the same table, the same glass of water beside her hand. From the outside, she appeared unchanged. Yet 6 months of preparation had finally reached its destination. Across the room, one board member quietly stepped onto the stage and spoke to Ethan again. This time the exchange lasted longer. Ethan listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened. He glanced toward several investors, then toward the legal representatives standing near the entrance. Finally, his eyes moved across the ballroom and found Claire. For the first time that evening, he looked at her without certainty. The distance between them felt enormous. Claire held his gaze for a second. Then she calmly stood. The simple movement drew attention. Several nearby guests turned toward her. Others followed their eyes. The room seemed to notice her all at once. Not as Ethan's former wife. Not as part of his past. As someone who had known exactly where this night was heading. Claire picked up her small evening clutch and stepped away from the table. No dramatic speech followed. No public confrontation. No accusations. She simply walked toward the ballroom exit. Each step felt quiet against the marble floor. Behind her, Ethan remained on stage surrounded by questions he could no longer control. Near the rear of the room, Alexander Reed rose from his chair. He placed his untouched coffee cup on the table and adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. Then he followed, not rushing, not drawing attention, simply walking in the same direction. Claire reached the lobby first. The sounds of the ballroom faded behind the closed doors. The hotel felt different out here, quieter, cooler. A fountain near the entrance sent water cascading over polished stone. Outside, city lights reflected against the glass walls of the building. Claire stopped near the revolving doors and looked out toward the street. Traffic moved steadily through the night. The world continued exactly as it always had. Behind her, footsteps approached. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Alexander stopped beside her. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, earned. Finally, Alexander glanced toward the ballroom doors and then back toward Claire. "You knew," he said. His voice was calm, observational, not surprised. Claire looked through the glass toward the city lights. "I knew he would make the choices himself." Alexander smiled slightly. He understood the distinction. Ethan had not been defeated by a rival. He had been undone by his own decisions, his own words, his own certainty. Claire had simply arranged the board and waited. A valet opened the front door for arriving guests. Cool night air drifted into the lobby. Alexander extended his hand toward her. Not as a rescuer, not as a savior, as an equal, as someone who had witnessed the entire game and understood who had truly won. Claire looked at his hand for a moment before taking it. Together they stepped toward the entrance. Behind them, the ballroom remained filled with questions, reports, and consequences. Ahead of them, the city stretched beneath thousands of lights. Claire never looked back. She did not need to. The victory had never been about destroying Ethan. It had been about reclaiming herself. The billionaire did not save her. He took her hand after she had already saved herself.